Okay, let me start this story where the world just tilted violently on its axis for me. You know how some moments in life are so mundane, so absolutely normal, that they become terrifying when they explode. This was one of them. It was a cold Tuesday afternoon in late October. The kind of day where the air bites at your ears and you instantly regret not wearing gloves. I was in the entryway of my house, the house I'd lived in for 40 years, doing the most normal thing in the world, putting on my coat. It was my favorite old wool coat, a faded burgundy color, a little heavy but perfect for the chill. I remember fumbling slightly with the zipper because my fingers were already numb from carrying the groceries in earlier. I was getting ready to head out to the community center for my weekly book club meeting, a small luxury I always looked forward to. My son David and his wife Sarah were in the living room. They'd moved in temporarily, or so they claimed, about 6 months prior, after a pipe burst in their apartment. Temporary had a funny way of stretching, didn't it? As I finally got the zipper up and adjusted the collar, I heard David's voice, but it wasn't the usual distracted grunt he usually gave me. It was sharp, clear, and dripping with an authority he hadn't earned. "Mom, wait up," he called, standing in the living room archway. He had this tight, satisfied little smirk on his face. Sarah was right behind him, her arms crossed, looking smug like she was holding the winning lottery ticket. I turned, smiling faintly, thinking maybe he was offering me a ride. We weren't exactly close anymore. Things had been weirdly strained since they moved in, but I'm his mother. Hope springs eternal, right? "What is it, dear?" "I'm going to be late," I said, reaching for my purse on the small mahogany table by the door. He took a step closer, and that smirk widened into something truly ugly. It wasn't a smile, it was a predator showing its teeth. "You're not going to need that coat, Mom. Or your purse, for that matter." I froze, my hand hovering over the worn leather of my bag. "What are you talking about, David?" And then he shouted it. It wasn't a playful shout or a frustrated shout. It was a declaration of war, delivered in the place I thought was my sanctuary. "You're not living with us anymore." The sound echoed off the high ceilings of the hall. The air completely drained out of the room. I felt the blood rush from my head. I must have looked like a startled deer caught in the headlights because Sarah actually chuckled, a cold, tiny little sound. "What is this, David? Is this some sort of sick joke?" My voice was barely a whisper. I could feel the old, familiar panic tightening in my chest, the kind that hits you when you realize you're fundamentally unsafe. "No joke, Evelyn," he said, using my first name, which he only did when he was trying to be stern and adult. "The landlord called. They fixed our apartment. We're moving back out next week. And we're taking the house with us." He paused, letting the words sink in, watching my reaction with cruel interest. He actually seemed to be enjoying my confusion and fear. "This house is too big for you, Mom. Too much maintenance. Too many stairs. Sarah and I need the space. We're going to be starting a family soon. It makes more sense for us to have it." Sarah stepped forward, her expression shifting from smug to falsely sympathetic. "It's for the best, Evelyn. Honestly. We've talked to a lawyer. We can help you find a lovely little apartment. Maybe in one of those assisted living communities. All your friends are there anyway, right?" The emphasis she put on assisted living was like a tiny polished knife twisting into my side. I stood there wearing my burgundy coat, ready to face the outside world, but suddenly realizing the real danger wasn't outside. It was right here, standing in front of me in the form of my own son and his calculating wife. The sheer audacity, the cold-blooded entitlement was breathtaking. "You can't just decide that," I stammered, trying to regain control of my voice, trying to push down the wave of nausea. "We already did, Mom," David countered, pulling a thick manila envelope from behind his back. It looked official. It looked terrifying. "This is the legal notice. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. We've already contacted the mortgage company. We're taking over the payments and the title. Don't worry, we'll put your name on the box for the mail so you can still get your junk mail." He finished the sentence with a condescending wink. I stared at the envelope. It was real. The crisp paper, the formal typeface. This wasn't a suggestion. It was an eviction notice served by my own child. The son I had raised, sacrificed for, loved unconditionally. It's in moments like this, when you're standing at the edge of the emotional cliff, that you have to decide whether to crumble or fight. And in that frozen moment, watching their triumphant faces, something in me snapped. Not in a crying, hysterical way but in a quiet, steel-cold way. The tears that had been pricking my eyes dried up. The nausea settled into a hard knot of resolve. I looked from David's self-satisfied face to Sarah's cold, measuring gaze. They thought I was an obstacle to be moved. They thought I was weak. They thought I was old and therefore disposable. I adjusted my coat. I didn't reach for the purse. I took a deep, steadying breath. I looked David straight in the eye, and the fear in my expression must have been replaced by something he didn't recognize, because his smirk faltered just for a second. 30 days, you say? I asked, my voice surprisingly level. Yes. Sign here to acknowledge receipt, he commanded, holding out a pen and pointing to a line on the document. I looked at the pen. I looked at the paper. I saw the weapon they were using against me. And then I remembered the real weapon I had, the one they had completely forgotten about, tucked away in my small safe upstairs. The original deed. No, I don't think I'll sign that, David, I said softly, pushing his hand and the papers away. But thank you for the warning. He was furious. You have to sign it. It's legal protocol. No, I don't, I stated, walking past him and opening the front door. The blast of cold air felt refreshing, cleansing. I just have to acknowledge I received it. Which I have. You told me. Loudly. As I stepped out onto the porch, zipping my coat up tighter, I turned back. David was rushing toward the door, confused and angry. Sarah was still standing in the living room, whispering something urgently into her phone. Where are you going, Mom? You just got a legal notice. David yelled, stopping at the threshold. I smiled, a real smile this time, but it held no warmth. It held a promise. I'm going to run an errand, David. A very important errand. And you're right. I'm not living with you anymore. That much is true. And I shut the door quietly behind me. I walked down the stone path, my heart pounding a rhythm of pure, cold-hearted determination. They wanted the house. Fine. They could have the legal battle of their lives. But they would not have my house. I pulled out my phone and called a number I hadn't dialed in years. The number for Mr. Henderson, the notary public. I needed an urgent appointment. I told him it was a matter of life and death, or at least, a matter of a lifetime of work being stolen. As I walked toward my car, a battered but reliable Ford, I could hear David's furious shouts echoing faintly through the closed door. They thought they had won the battle just by serving the papers. They had no idea I was already plotting the end of their entire war. The 30-day countdown was on, but the clock was ticking against them, not me. Hey, can you believe the nerve of some people? If you're watching this, drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to know who's on this crazy ride with me. I got into the car, turned the key and pulled out onto the street. The envelope was sitting on the mahogany table, exactly where David had left it. A declaration of their intent. But the journey I was about to take was the declaration of mine. My first stop wasn't the book club. It was the notary. The battle for Evelyn's house had officially begun. They wanted me to sign a paper I feared the most, an eviction notice. But I was about to sign the paper they would fear the most. My hands were shaking slightly as I drove, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. But the fear was gone, replaced by a kind of brittle, protective anger. To understand the gravity of what David and Sarah were trying to do, you need to understand the history of that house. My house, the one I'm calling Evelyn's house because it absolutely was, every brick and shingle of it. My late husband Richard and I bought that place 40 years ago. It wasn't a fancy modern palace. It was a sturdy 3-story Victorian with a wraparound porch and a yard full of the most unruly rose bushes you could imagine. We poured our hearts, souls, and every spare penny into it. Richard, a talented but perpetually underpaid carpenter, rebuilt the kitchen cabinets with his own hands. I wallpapered the dining room 3 times over the years, each pattern reflecting a different happy stage of our lives. That house wasn't just a building, it was a character in our family story. David was brought home from the hospital to the pink nursery on the 2nd floor. His first steps were taken on the worn, colorful Persian rug in the living room. It held the echoes of birthday parties, Christmas mornings, and the quiet comfort of long evenings after Richard passed away 10 years ago. It was my anchor. When Richard died, the first thing David did in his grief-stricken, overly practical way was push me to sell it. Too much work, Mom, he'd argued. You should downsize. I refused fiercely. Richard had paid off the mortgage just 6 months before he got sick, A final beautiful gift to me. I had the deed clear and free locked away upstairs. David and Sarah moving in 6 months ago started subtly, like a slow-moving infection. Remember how I mentioned the pipe burst in their apartment? It seemed like a genuine crisis at first. I welcomed them with open arms. Of course, my son and daughter-in-law could stay. But the subtle disrespect started almost immediately. Sarah began reorganizing my pantry. She called my antique tea set, which was a wedding gift from my grandmother, clutter. David, who was supposed to be saving money while staying here for free, started making demands. The thermostat was always set to their preference, not mine. The scent of my favorite lilac air freshener was quickly replaced by Sarah's expensive, aggressive sandalwood candles. It was always small things, but they chipped away at the feeling of ownership and comfort. They barely lifted a finger around the house. I was still cooking most of the meals, even though they often complained that my cooking was too bland or too traditional. I was doing their laundry alongside mine. I was essentially their free housekeeper and chef. I remember one evening, Sarah had hosted a few of her friends for a small gathering. When they were leaving, one of them, a woman named Chloe, thanked Sarah profusely for the gorgeous space. And Sarah, right in front of me, had smiled and said, "Oh yes, it's just the best. We're practically the owners now, you know. Evelyn is just staying with us." That line, "Evelyn is just staying with us," cut me deep. I was standing in the dining room clearing the appetizer plates and I nearly dropped a platter. I remember Chloe giving me an awkward, pitying look. I didn't say anything, which was my first mistake. I let the comment slide, rationalizing it as Sarah's attempt to look sophisticated in front of her friends. I told myself I was being overly sensitive or maybe just old. The dialogue between David and me had almost completely broken down. It was always transactional. "Mom, can you lend us $50? Mom, did you forget to pay the cable bill? Mom, we need the car tonight." There was no, "How are you?" No, "I love you." The emotional connection I had tried so hard to build, especially after Richard died, had withered under their constant low-grade selfishness. The one bright spot in my life was my granddaughter, Lily. She was David's daughter from his first brief marriage, and she was the sweetest, most thoughtful young woman you could imagine. Lily lived 3 states away, but we talked every Sunday. She was finishing up nursing school, working 3 part-time jobs, and somehow still managing to send me a small handwritten card every month. David rarely even mentioned her. He had essentially written Lily off after he married Sarah, who clearly saw Lily as a financial drain and a reminder of his past. Lily loved the house almost as much as I did. He spent summers here as a teenager. She knew the secret hiding spot for the spare key under the second-to-last brick on the garden path. She knew which floorboards creaked in the master bedroom. She even helped Richard and me paint the porch swing that faded shade of robin's egg blue that Richard loved. I distinctly remember the last conversation I had with David that felt remotely genuine about 3 months ago. He was talking about how he wanted to save up to buy a place, and I told him, "You'll have plenty of help. This house will be yours someday, David. I've written it into the will." His eyes had lit up, not with love for me, but with the cold gleam of financial opportunity. "Oh, that's great, Mom. You won't have to worry about a thing." He gave me a quick, almost fake hug. He thought that assurance, that promise for the future, meant he could treat me however he wanted in the present. He thought the will was the final word. That was the mistake they both made. They got so fixated on the will, the future easy, guaranteed inheritance, that they completely ignored the current reality. They forgot that I, Evelyn, was still the sole living owner. And as I drove that day, shaking off the shock of David's shouted eviction, I realized they hadn't just overstepped. They had signed their own eviction notice from my life. Their greed had finally stripped away the last layers of my maternal forbearance. I recalled Sarah's voice telling her friend that I was just staying with them. That line became the fuel for the fire in my belly. "No," I thought, pulling into the notary's parking lot. "This is my house. And now you don't get it at all." They had calculated my timeline, 30 days to vacate. They had calculated my assets, the house. They had calculated my emotional state, old, vulnerable, and easily intimidated. What they failed to calculate was the silent strength of a mother scorned and the legal power of a signed deed, an instrument much more powerful than a piece of paper David had printed off his computer. The setup was complete, the characters introduced, and the conflict was now boiling over into the next stage. It was time for action. The air inside Mr. Henderson's office was warm and smelled faintly of old paper and dust. It was a comforting smell, the smell of legality and permanence, which was exactly what I needed right then. Mr. Henderson, a kind, slightly rumpled man who had handled Richard's will and my own financial documents for years, looked concerned when he saw the frantic yet determined look on my face. "Evelyn, are you all right?" he asked, waving me toward a chair. "When you said it was urgent, I assumed a medical emergency." I sat down, pulling the burgundy coat tighter around me. "It is an emergency, Mr. Henderson, but of the financial and moral variety. My son David and his wife Sarah are trying to steal my house." I recounted the morning's events, the shouted eviction, the fake legal papers, the smug entitlement. I tried to keep my voice steady, but the betrayal made it crack. Mr. Henderson listened, his face growing grimmer. When I finished, he didn't offer sympathy. He offered strategy, which I appreciated far more. "The paper David gave you is essentially meaningless, Evelyn. He has no legal standing to evict you. You are the sole owner, correct? The deed is clear." "Completely clear," I confirmed, "and it's locked in the safe upstairs." "Good. But the fact that they are willing to go this far, even fabricating documents, shows their intent is serious. They probably believe that if they make your life miserable enough, you'll cave and sign the house over." This conversation was a turning point. Mr. Henderson wasn't just confirming the legal setup. He was giving me the blueprint for the layered conflict. The main problem was David's greed, but the secondary challenge was the time constraint he had imposed. The 30-day window he thought was an obstacle for me, but which I decided to turn into my deadline. "They're planning on using that 30 days to force me out," I mused aloud. "They'll escalate. They'll make the house unlivable. They might try to claim you're not mentally fit to manage the property," Mr. Henderson suggested grimly. "That's a common, if ugly, tactic against older homeowners." A chill went down my spine. That was exactly what Sarah had hinted at with her talk of assisted living. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about my dignity, my autonomy, and their willingness to lie and manipulate to get what they wanted. The core of the conflict was now clear. It wasn't just a property dispute. It was a psychological battle for control. I remember the day before this whole mess, the Friday before, which adds a crucial layer to the conflict. I had come home early from the grocery store. I had heard David and Sarah in the kitchen, their voices low and urgent. I stopped in the hall just out of sight, and what I heard was bone-chilling. "The appraisal came in at $450,000, David," Sarah whispered excitedly. "We pay off her funeral expenses, split the rest, and boom, down payment on that condo in Miami. We're set." "That's why we need to accelerate this," David replied. "Mom's starting to ask too many questions. I told her the will says I get the house, but she keeps saying she'll revisit the terms. We can't let her do that. We need her signature on the transfer now." Sarah's voice was sharp. "So that we're moving back to our apartment story is working? She thinks we're just leaving." "Yeah, she believes it. I've told her we'll move out next week. Then we hit her with the legal demand right after we move out. She'll be so overwhelmed and lonely that she'll sign the deed to us just to get rid of the hassle." That conversation, the one where I heard them coolly discussing my death, my funeral expenses, and their plan to use psychological warfare, overwhelmed and lonely, was the real fuse that had been lit. That was the moment I realized my own son saw me not as a mother, but as an asset to be liquidated. I shared this crucial detail with Mr. Henderson. "They overheard me talking to Lily on the phone last week," I explained. "I told Lily that Richard and I had always intended for her to have something too. I said I was going to change the will to make sure she was provided for, maybe even give her the house after I was gone, since David clearly didn't respect it." Mr. Henderson leaned back, a shrewd look in his eye. So that's the real fear. They're afraid you'll change the will and cut them out, or at least significantly reduce their share. The eviction notice wasn't just about getting the house. It was about rushing the process before you had time to legally adjust your future plans. "Exactly," I agreed, a sense of clarity washing over me. They were trying to use the 30 days to panic me into signing the transfer to them. The paper he wanted me to sign wasn't the eviction acknowledgement. It was probably a legally binding, predatory transfer of ownership. The layered conflict was complete. The surface problem: David and Sarah are trying to kick Evelyn out of her home. The deeper problem: The betrayal. David and Sarah are discussing her death and her psychological vulnerability to obtain the house. The central dilemma, the moral decision: should Evelyn just sell the house and move on, giving them a partial win? Or should she use her power as the sole owner to teach them a devastating final lesson about greed and respect? That's where the idea came to me, a sudden bright flash of inspiration that cut through all the anxiety. It was the perfect revenge because it would hurt them where they felt it most, their bank accounts, while simultaneously rewarding the person who deserved it most. Lily. Mr. Henderson, I said, leaning forward, my voice low and firm. We need to execute a new plan. I don't want to change the will. That can be contested and it will be messy and drag on for years. I want to transfer the property now. Today. To whom? To Lily. My granddaughter. David's daughter. Mr. Henderson's eyebrows shot up. He understood immediately. A living gift deed. Irrevocable. It bypasses the will entirely. It would make Lily the sole immediate owner of the house. And there's virtually nothing David or Sarah could do to fight it, especially if it's done quickly and legally. The rising tension in my chest eased, replaced by a cold, thrilling certainty. I smiled, a genuine if slightly wicked smile. They think I'm too old to fight. They think they can simply bully me out. Let's show them what a lifetime of legal ownership and a mother's silent fury looks like. I want to sign the paper they feared the most, the legal transfer of the property to someone who actually deserves it. The turning point was upon me. I was no longer the victim. I was the strategist, using their own timeline and their own weapon, legal paperwork, against them. The notary's office was suddenly buzzing with quiet, focused activity. Mr. Henderson was a man of efficiency when properly motivated. He pulled the original deed for my house from the public records database and began drafting the new document, the living gift deed of transfer. He worked quickly, his fingers flying over the keyboard, pausing only to confirm the legal description of the property. We need to get this signed, notarized, and filed with the county recorder's office as quickly as possible, Evelyn, Mr. Henderson explained, sliding the first draft toward me. The moment that deed is recorded, the house belongs to Lily. That's the turning point. Until then, you are technically still the owner and David could cause a fuss. I reread the draft multiple times. The legal jargon was dense, but the meaning was crystal clear. Evelyn Grace Miller hereby grants, transfers, and conveys to Lily Rose Miller. It was beautiful. It was final. The emotional stakes were incredibly high. This wasn't just an act of revenge. It was an act of profound love and correction. David and Sarah had made their intentions clear. They would liquidate the house, sell off the memories, and use the money for their own selfish pursuits. Lily, who was working tirelessly to become a nurse, deserved the stability and the history that this house represented. I remember thinking about Lily's reaction when I called her earlier that morning, right after I spoke to Mr. Henderson. I kept the conversation deliberately vague. "Hi, sweetie, it's Grandma Evelyn," I said, trying to keep the excitement, or maybe it was sheer panic, out of my voice. "Grandma, everything okay? You sound determined," she noted, always the perceptive one. "Everything is going to be wonderful, but I need you to do something for me, a big favor, a quick legal formality. Can you check your email? I'm going to have a document sent to you from Mr. Henderson's office. You need to read it, sign it electronically, and send it back immediately. It's time sensitive." "Grandma, is this about the will? Are you selling the house? What's going on?" she asked, a thread of worry in her voice. "It's not the will, honey. And I'm not selling. It's something much better. Just trust me on this one. It's a gift. A preemptive one. Your father and Sarah have been showing their true colors, and I need to make sure the house goes to someone who cherishes it." Lily, bless her heart, didn't argue. She knew my relationship with David had been strained. She simply said, "Okay, Grandma. Send it. I trust you." That unconditional trust made the whole act of signing the papers even more meaningful. A few minutes later, Mr. Henderson received the confirmation. "Lily's signature is authenticated and attached, Evelyn." She signed the acceptance of the gift. The moment had arrived. Mr. Henderson presented the final, immaculate document to me. He pointed to the line, "Grantor's signature." I took the pen, the very instrument David had tried to force on me for my own demise, and I signed my name, Evelyn Grace Miller. It wasn't a rushed, frantic signature. It was slow, deliberate, and firm, the culmination of 40 years of sacrifice and a morning of soul-shattering betrayal. With that single elegant stroke of the pen, I essentially cancelled out David's entire future plan, the plan he had so smugly laid out for me in the foyer. Mr. Henderson then affixed the gold seal, making that simple piece of paper an official, notarized, and irreversible legal reality. The weight that had been crushing me since David's shout that morning lifted instantly. "It's done," Mr. Henderson said, placing the executed deed into a fresh manila folder. A folder identical to the one David had used for his fake eviction notice. Only this one held real power. "I'm having my runner take this directly to the county recorder's office right now. By the end of the day, Lily will officially own your house." I stood up, the burgundy coat feeling less like an old garment and more like armor. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson. You have no idea what you've done for me." "I have an idea, Evelyn. You've protected your legacy and rewarded kindness over greed. It's a satisfying day in law, I can tell you." I left the office with a feeling of profound quietude. The storm was coming, but I was already safe inside the bunker. I didn't go back home immediately. I went to a quiet coffee shop and sat in a booth, sipping a steaming cup of tea, waiting. I waited for the confirmation email from Mr. Henderson. The moment that email landed announcing the official recording of the deed, the game would be over. Around 4:30 p.m. my phone chimed. It was the email. Subject: Deed filed, recording complete. I closed my eyes for a moment, savoring the victory. The house now belonged to Lily. The legal turning point was absolute. David and Sarah's 30-day countdown was irrelevant. They had been working on a timetable they thought would give them power, but I had used their same window of time to ensure their total and complete defeat. I drove home then calmly. I parked the Ford in the driveway, feeling every bit of the house's history greet me as I approached the porch. I walked inside. David and Sarah were right where I expected them to be. In the living room, whispering conspiratorially, no doubt planning their next move to escalate the psychological warfare against me. I walked past them, giving them a small, serene smile. "I'm home," I announced brightly, taking off my coat. The silence in the room was thick. They stared at me, expecting me to be devastated, crying or begging. David finally broke the silence, his voice laced with venom. "So, did you go see a lawyer, Mom? Did you finally realize you can't fight us on this?" "Oh, I went to see someone, dear," I replied, hanging my coat on the hook. "I ran a very important errand." I walked over to the mahogany table, picked up the fake eviction notice David had left there and held it up. Then slowly, deliberately I tore it in half. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. David's eyes went wide. I sat down in my favorite armchair, ready for the final confrontation. The turning point was complete. The resolution was imminent. I sat in my chair, the two ripped halves of David's fake legal notice fluttering to the floor. The silence that followed felt enormous, heavy, and pregnant with the inevitable confrontation. David finally moved, stalking toward me, his face crimson. The smug predator had been replaced by a furious, cornered animal. Sarah watched from the archway, her hand covering her mouth, realizing something had gone fundamentally wrong. "What was that, Mom? You can't just tear up a legal notice," David yelled, his voice shaking. "It wasn't a legal notice, David," I replied calmly, crossing one leg over the other. "It was a badly copied forgery printed on cheap paper. But I will admit it served its purpose." "What purpose?" he spat, leaning over me, his hands clenched into fists. "You have 30 days to get out. We are taking possession. Now where is the deed? I want the original deed. Sign the transfer papers right now, or I swear I will make your life a living hell until you do." He was demanding the original deed, the very thing I had used against him. This was the moment of the twist and resolution. "You're too late, David," I said, my voice barely a whisper, forcing him to strain to hear. "Too late for what?" I stood up slowly, reaching into the pocket of my coat that I had just hung up, and pulled out the manila folder Mr. Henderson had given me, the folder containing the officially filed deed. I didn't hand it to him. I opened it myself, pulling out the top document. "This," I said, holding up the notarized, sealed document so the sunlight from the window caught the gold foil, "is the paper you feared the most. It is an irrevocable living gift deed of transfer." His eyes went wide, flicking from the document to my face. He still didn't understand, his mind too focused on his original plan. "What? You signed it over to us?" he asked, a flicker of hope of sickening greed returning to his face. Why didn't you just say so? Good. Now sign the rest of the documentation and we can be done with this mess. Sarah took a cautious step forward, a relieved smile starting to form. I shook my head, smiling sadly. No, David. I did not sign it over to you. You made it abundantly clear this morning that you see me as disposable, this house as a commodity, and your own family as a means to an end. You talked about my funeral expenses and you planned to use my loneliness against me. You forgot that I heard you. You forgot that I am the sole owner. I paused, letting the weight of the moment crush him. This deed, I continued, tapping the paper with my finger, was signed, notarized, and officially filed with the county recorder's office this afternoon at 4:32 p.m. It irrevocably transfers the title of this property to your daughter. I looked directly at Sarah, whose jaw had dropped. Then I turned back to David, whose face was a study in shock, disbelief, and mounting terror. The house now belongs to Lily Rose Miller, I stated simply. Your daughter. My granddaughter. The silence in the room was absolute. David looked at me like I had slapped him across the face with a brick of gold. Lily? You gave the house to Lily? He sputtered, his voice escalating into a horrified screech. You can't do that. I'm your son. I'm in the will. That's not fair. You cut me out. Fair. I echoed, lowering the deed and looking at him with cold disappointment. Fair was raising you in this home. Fair was letting you stay here rent-free for 6 months. Fair was putting you in the will in the first place. What is not fair is shouting at your mother, serving her with fake eviction papers, and trying to steal the roof over her head for a down payment on a Miami condo. But she's 3 states away. She can't manage it. She's a student. We'll contest this. Sarah finally shrieked, rushing into the room. You can certainly try, I said, putting the deed back in the folder and tucking the folder under my arm. Mr. Henderson assured me that an irrevocable living gift deed, properly executed and filed, is virtually airtight. And as for Lily being 3 states away, she's coming home next week. Not only did I give her the deed, but I also gave her the keys, the lock codes, and a sizable check to cover property taxes and the first year of utilities. She will be living here, running the house, and finishing her degree remotely from her new property. I walked toward the kitchen, leaving them paralyzed in the living room. I turned back one last time. And here is the final true legal notice, David, I said, my voice ringing with finality. The owner of the house, Lily Miller, has asked me to inform you and Sarah that as of next Sunday, you will both be trespassing. You have 7 days to gather your things and vacate the premises. You are welcome to retrieve the rest of your belongings from the curb on Monday morning. I didn't wait for their response. I just walked into the kitchen and started making myself a cup of tea. I could hear David's enraged, incoherent shouts and Sarah's frantic, tearful pacing as they finally understood the depth of their loss. They had tried to steal a house and, in the process, had lost their inheritance, their free housing, and any claim on my affection. The next few days were chaos for them, filled with slamming doors and furious phone calls to lawyers who, I imagine, confirmed the terrible truth of the situation. For me, they were peaceful. I was no longer cooking or cleaning for them. I was simply waiting. A week later, just before the Sunday deadline, I helped Lily move into her new home. She cried when she saw the deed and then hugged me so hard I thought my ribs would crack. Thank you, Grandma, she whispered. I'll never let you down. I know you won't, darling, I told her, kissing her forehead. This house only needs one thing. Love. And you have plenty of that. David and Sarah were gone by Monday morning. I found a note taped to the kitchen counter. It was from David, just 3 words scrawled furiously. I hate you. I smiled, crumpled the note and tossed it into the recycling bin. I didn't care. The house was saved. The right person was rewarded. And the greedy ones learned that paper, when signed by the right hand, can be a weapon more devastating than any shout. I still live in the house too, of course. Lily wouldn't have it any other way. But now I live as a welcome guest in the sanctuary I saved, under the kind and loving ownership of my incredible granddaughter. And that, my friends, is how I signed the paper my son feared the most. If you loved this story of cold-blooded revenge and ultimate justice, hit that like button. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next Family Tales video. And let me know in the comments, what would you have done in my position?